population are overweight or obese, but the primary point I wanted to make with this slide is that a good 34% of those, the people in this country, fit the criteria for metabolic syndrome, and our diet is tailor-made for addressing metabolic syndrome issues. The other big point I want to make is that according to this Gallup poll in 2011, pretty much if you poll people in this country at any given moment, 1 out of 2 will say they're currently doing some sort of a diet. Everybody's trying to diet, everybody's trying to lose weight, but obviously we're not succeeding. Let's go to the next slide. This is the most recent Centers for Disease Control chart, and the reason I included this, I just wanted to point out that we now have a couple of states that have 35% of their population as obese. So this is an alarming statistic, and I'm thankful that we have practitioners that are getting serious about taking on some ways to help people with tools for diet and exercise that will be effective for them. Next slide shows another statistic that we only have about this is according to the National Weight Control Registry, we only have about 5 to 10% that once they attempt weight loss that actually manage to sustain the weight loss. So we need not only to be able to lose the weight, we need to be able to keep it off, and that's where we think our diet can really help people. Let's move on. This is what I want to find interesting. If you look at this Gallup poll again, when people say, okay, I'm going to try to lose weight, what are they doing? In this particular poll, most people, if you look at the 23% that just simply ate less, tried to eat less, 12% actually count calories or try to do some portion control. And then look down below a little bit, 31% try to lose weight just by working out. And if you remember, there was a big study that came out a couple of years ago that flashed the headline, you can't, when it comes to trying to lose weight, you really need to do it with diet. You can't exercise your way into weight loss. And the reason for that is because you can't exercise out of a bad diet. It's almost impossible. People think, well, I'll just burn the calories, but if you don't do something to cut down the calories or address the metabolic issues in the body, it's just not effective. But the main point for this slide is the vast majority of people are still, as of 2011 anyway, trying something that has to do with calories in or calories burned type of an approach. So let's look beyond this, and I'll show you what the statistics are on that approach. Calorie controlled diet. So anything that, controls calories, whether it's Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, Nutrisystem, eDiets, fill in the blank. Do they work? Okay, we all know people that can lose weight controlling calories, and there's actually a strong evidence base that you can lose weight controlling calories. When you add exercise in with it, you have greater long-term success, but it's still not accomplishing the goal as evidenced by our national statistics and numbers. Most people still aren't doing it. So really the problem isn't this lack of ability to lose weight. Most people can muscle their way through any diet and get some weight off, but it's keeping it off over the long term that we're concerned about. The reason I included this diet study is to make a very strong point. We feel that one of the big problems with the calorie control approach is the fact that when people use calorie restriction diets, it is a known fact in obesity research that when any diet, people lose some lean mass. But this this diet tells the story. There are many other studies like this that I've seen over the years. This particular one looked at the Zone diet versus the American Heart Association Step 1 diet, which is calorie controlled, low fat, higher carb. They looked at 29 overweight men and women doing these diets for 6 weeks. And as you see there, the Zone group lost way more weight, and they lost 0.5% body fat in 6 weeks. The Heart Association diet group only lost 2.6 pounds and no body fat. Let me ask you, if they didn't lose fat, what did they lose? They lost lean mass. This, in our opinion, is one of the big reasons calorie-controlled diets are unsuccessful over the long term. It's not the only reason. I'll talk about more about that later, but it is a big reason. When you lose lean body mass, you lose basal metabolic rate. So let's go on. So the statistics are that in energy-restricted diets, up to 25% of the weight loss can be from lean mass. It's really important to try to exercise to help slow this loss of lean mass while you're dieting. It's also important to take in more protein. It can reduce the losses of lean mass by up to 1/3. So this is a really important point here. And it's one of the big failings of a typical diet approach, calorie control approach. Thankfully, we've had groups of obesity researchers looking at the weight control, the weight management problem, and saying, we have got to leave no stone unturned. We have got to look at everything. We are losing this battle. Why can't people control their weight? And as a result of their research, they concluded it's more than calories in versus calories out or burned. That is not the whole story. We have a lot of things going on in our population. We have endocrine disruptions from various sources. One of the big ones is environmental influences, which is the last bullet point. But people aren't sleeping well. We have people on a lot of different prescription drugs that are associated with weight gain, like birth control pills and some of the antidepressants, steroids that people may have to be on to manage certain conditions or that they are on. We have intergenerational and intrauterine effects. We know that when babies are born from obese parents, they have a much higher risk of being obese themselves. And it's not just from their environment and the home of what is being eaten. There are actually epigenetic effects. And now they're starting to look at appetite control factors. There's a lot of research going on in this area, dopamine and serotonin, many more. And this does our heart good because this is exactly why my husband, Jim Lavalle, wrote the book, Cracking the Metabolic Code, because we found in our practice when people came in for help with a health issue, we worked to balance out different areas of their metabolic function, and as a byproduct, they would lose weight. And so a few years ago, when we were seeing that the Surgeon General was putting this call to action to Americans, we've got to start fighting this epidemic of overweight and obesity, and the whole message was control calories and exercise, control calories and exercise, and we were just shaking our heads going, it's not the answer. People, many people can't lose weight on low calorie, and if they can't, then there's an endocrine disruption, something disrupting, whether it's sleep debt or something from the environment. Many people have stress as a factor affecting appetite and affecting insulin resistance. So there are a lot of reasons, but when people start to learn about their metabolism and how to address these issues, they can be successful, much more successful with weight loss, and they can keep it off. Another point we like to that I think is so crucial is yes, we need to address weight, but have you ever noticed maybe you've had this experience yourself, or you see it in a friend or acquaintances. When people go on a diet, I had this happen so clearly one time. I ran into a woman that actually was a friend of mine. I didn't know her, and my friend was saying how great this woman looked, and I thought, to me, she looked pale, she looked tired, you know. Well, here I found out the woman had lost a good bit of weight, and she had been doing Weight Watchers, and I just, to myself, thought, so many people, when they go on diets, they lose energy, they look pale, they don't, you know, you don't gain like vitality when you go on a diet. Many people feel worse. So what is our goal? It's not just to control weight. We want to have optimal health. We want to feel better. And not only that, we want to be effective at managing, you know, risk profiles. So we want to manage lipids, and we want to manage risks like increased waist circumference, you know, an increased waist to hip ratio. We want to control inflammation, and we want to help keep our immune system strong. So there's more than just the weight loss that we're accomplishing with the Metabolic Code diet, and we'll kind of explain all the reasons why. So let's get into the features of the diet. Our diet is geared toward the common issues that are going on today. It's geared toward addressing the strong presence of insulin resistance that we have in 35% of our population, at least 35%. It's also geared towards helping gut health, all the realm of gut health issues that are on the rise today. We have so many people, so many more adults developing allergies. We have more autoimmune conditions than ever. Those are definitely on the rise. And it also looks to address issues like stress and its impact on a person not being able to sleep, on food cravings. It also looks to support, you know, assess and better support thyroid function. That's something we'll find in a good many people. They have symptoms of low thyroid. What can we do to support better thyroid function? Oops, okay. And we also look to address the issues that are affecting us from toxicity and, you know, chemical exposure from our foods and our environment. Okay, now we're ready. So what are the components I want to go over? The Metabolic Code diet is an anti-inflammatory diet. It has anti-inflammatory components. One of the major ones is low glycemic load, but low glycemic load has some other benefits all its own. It is also an elimination diet. We take out the top food allergens in order to let people make a discovery as to whether food sensitivities are playing a role in their weight and their health issues. The buzzword today is plant foods, right? Try to go to a plant food-based diet. If you look at our diet, we certainly do encourage intake of a lot of fruits and especially vegetables. And we also emphasize the quality of the foods we eat. Primarily, try to go toward non-toxic versions of organic or sustainably grown foods. So these are the features, and we'll look into each one of them a little bit more. The first and probably most important is the anti-inflammatory part. This is something that has been getting a lot of research, and it's the reason why a Mediterranean diet is kind of highly promoted today. And it's because nutrition and food researchers began to finally get the lights turned on that the American diet is way too high in highly refined and processed, calorie-dense, nutrient-depleted foods. What these types of diets do is they cause very elevated spikes in blood sugar and lipids after meals. And that is called what they call postprandial dysmetabolism, or it's also sometimes called dysglycemia. The problem is it creates so much oxidative stress in the body. For however long, the blood sugar stays elevated after the meal. And that free radicals that start to get produced are what cause us to have tendency towards iatrogenesis. So we have plaque formation from the endothelial dysfunction and the hypercoagulability of the blood. So, and we even have sympathetic hyperactivity. So eating a lot of calories, and especially this high glycemic calories, actually causes a stress response in the body. And they know that the more people eat these types of meals, it has this cumulative effect of causing cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So these bullet points here are what some researchers found. Okay, what were ways of eating that reduced this post-meal dysglycemia? Well, the most important thing was trading out, if you see the next to the last point, the highly processed foods and drinks with sugar, high fructose corn syrup, white flour, and trans fat. Swap those foods out for your high fiber carbohydrates like low glycemic index, vegetables and fruits, whole grains, and there's I have one caveat on whole grains that we'll discuss, legumes and nuts. That's probably the most important thing people can do. But in addition, it was a very strong influence by making sure to eat lean protein at all three of your big meals of the day. Eating protein helps slow down the release of sugars from the meal into the bloodstream and helps level out blood sugar. Another helpful thing is to actually eat a handful of nuts. In particular, it's helpful if you eat it with a meal. And interestingly, they recommended eat salad every day. Now, do you remember hearing a headline a while back that, I saw some banter about this online, about have you ever noticed people that eat salad are overweight? Well, the statistics don't bear this out. The problem is people, yes, they glob a lot of high sugar dressings on their salad. That takes away the benefit, right? But in general, if we eat a nice bit of leafy greens with some vinegar and oil, that's a health benefit. And then what always amazes me is that they mention to limit portion sizes to modest quantities because that's so subjective, but at least it's a shot. And then the next slide shows 3 more points that they tried to make that people should try to, this is the reference for the study, that people should try to maintain normal weight and avoid becoming overweight or obese and have a good waist circumference. Well, that's what people are trying desperately to do, and that's what they need this information for. Okay, let's move on. So some of the diets that are out there that recommend this are things like the Mediterranean diet, the current My Plate. Harvard Healthy Eating has a healthy eating pyramid, and this is, in their take on this is the way your plate would look. And it's better than what we had in the past with the pyramid, but it still doesn't get quite there. If you see on this plate, they have dairy on it. The Harvard Healthy Eating version recommends water instead of milk. Okay, you can go ahead and go on, Marta. So what this diet will help people accomplish is learning how to improve the overall quality of their diet, but the problem is that portion control may not be enough, and in addition, that amount of whole grains on a plate might be too much for many people in our experience, and again, it doesn't control anything to do with the allergenic load. So if you're trying to switch from regular wheat bread to whole wheat, it's not going to be that much of a benefit if you happen to be a person that has sensitivity to wheat or gluten. Okay, let's move on. So the big factor that is controlled in this diet is glycemic index and glycemic load. And we're probably going to have to move through the slides quickly so we have time to go through some of the other points. But glycemic index, you can move on, Marta, is how quickly your blood sugar elevates, and glycemic load is how long, because it's the total amount of carbs in the food. So this is just a couple of studies that show when people eat too much high glycemic load and index foods, they really increase their risk factors. Okay, let's move on. So the foods with high glycemic index are sugar, fruit juices, starches, starchy foods like your baked goods, cereals, pastas, anything made from grains or flours, potatoes, and believe it or not, carrots. But carrots, we have a little point about that. The low glycemic index and load foods are your proteins, animal proteins, non-starchy vegetables, and fats. Okay, let's move on. The issue, I remember when the emphasis on glycemic index came out, people quit eating carrots. Yes, carrots happen to be a funny little vegetable that will spike your blood sugar up a little bit after you eat them, but there's only total carb of 5 grams and a half a cup of carrots, so they're very safe to eat. There's only so much carb in a carrot, but compared to your breads and pastas, potatoes, things like that, you get 15 grams of carb in as little as a third to a half a cup. So you don't have to eat very much to get a good bit of carb. There's been a shift on this. You will see, like even Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig and C Diets and some of the other ones now are offering low glycemic, more high fiber options. So at this point is now being acknowledged more generally. The issue is low glycemic index foods are much more satiating than high glycemic index. And it has to do with that rapid rise and fall of blood sugar after a high glycemic index food. So one of the advantages of addressing carb load or glycemic load in the diet is that it can help control appetite. Okay, let's move on. This is the point I want to make with this study is that when they compared young adults eating low versus high glycemic load foods, everyone lost some weight and some waist circumference, but the lower glycemic index groups lost way more fat. The fat loss doubled. So if you really want to get to the results of losing fat, glycemic index and load are key. And this study, they noted that it was a particularly important thing for women to be able to lose weight. Now, the point of this, look, this is a high carb but calorie controlled American Heart Association diet. For 2 years they followed subjects compared to people doing a Mediterranean diet compared to a low carb diet. If you notice, by far the biggest weight loss was a low carb diet. The thing of it wasn't even calorie controlled. And they had the most improvements in triglycerides and cholesterol and HDL ratios. So you not only get the better weight loss, you get the better effect on lipids. The most important point, when you go low carb diet or low glycemic load, you inherently are taking in a bigger percentage of your calories from fat and protein. And some diets emphasize eating a little more fat, some diets emphasize eating a little more protein. But what I want to show you is when you eat a low carb diet, it's inherently always a little higher in percentage of calories from protein. And this study found that when they compared low fat, high carb diets to low glycemic load diets, they had bigger improvements in all those risk factors in the low glycemic load group. But the big point, this was huge, resting energy expenditure, which is a measure of your basal metabolic rate, reduced less in the low glycemic load group. This is a huge point. So when we're comparing controlling calories but eating more carbs as part of that mix, and people lose all this lean mass versus low carb, higher protein, you can preserve that lean mass. And as a little side benefit there, the low glycemic load group also had less hunger, and that ties in with those rises and falls in blood sugar. So it's a huge benefit by going low carb, higher fat and protein. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Just go to the next slide. This was another study that compared different types of low carb diets to a high carb diet, which is the first column. And basically, when they looked at all the factors in sum total, they felt that low carb, higher protein was the best diet to follow. although the high-fat group did have the biggest loss in waist circumference. But again, it's just the best overall, most favorable approach. So the metabolic code diet is a low-carb diet. Inherently, that means it's going to be higher in the percentage of calories from fat and protein. When you compare us to other low-carb diets, our diet falls in that 20 to 30% of the calories coming from carbohydrate. Main point here, it is not a very low-carb diet, and I have a slide on that that will show you the significance of that. So the zone diet comes in about 40%. South Beach, it's hard to tell depending on how they reintroduce. The point I want to make here, Paleolithic diets, a lot of people like paleo as an approach for a lower carb. You really won't know typically the percentage of calories coming from carb. It depends on if people are eating root vegetables as part of that diet and how much fruit they're eating. And ketogenic diets are kind of another fad low-carb diet that's going on nowadays. Okay, let's move on. The big warning. If people just do paleo and they really cut out all root vegetables, all starch, no beans, no nothing, they are not going to be taking in quite enough resistant starch. And this is a key point for success on the diet long term. When people do not get any resistant starch intake, they begin to lose their integrity of their gut health. This is what we found out. We were doing very low carb, no starch a few years ago, and what we found was people regained weight very rapidly when they went off the diet. So what we've done is we've modified now with this information that's coming in, and we've made sure that we've tried to protect the gut health by making sure we have resistant starch sources. Resistant starch, for those of you that aren't quite sure, it's any starch in foods that doesn't digest. When it's saying it's resistant, that's what it's resistant to, is digestion. Because it doesn't digest, that means it travels on to the large intestine and it feeds our beneficial, it serves as food for beneficial flora. So it's a prebiotic. By feeding our beneficial flora, it helps your beneficial flora to really thrive and proliferate and stay colonized in the gut. And this is a tremendous benefit to weight loss and to overall health, because when the beneficial flora eat, they produce as a byproduct these short-chain fatty acids like butyric acid that ends up serving as energy for your intestinal cells. So bottom line, resistant starch keeps gut flora happy, and that keeps your intestinal cells well fed and fully functioning. And the reason this is important, we'll go on to the next slide, is because it upregulates the production of glucagon-like peptide 1, which is an extremely important hormone for blood sugar regulation. And PYY is an extremely important hormone for appetite control. So when we keep the gut good and healthy, we help our blood sugar regulation and we help our appetite. And this was a study that was done here that showed that when people had resistant starch and source at the evening meal, they had improved glucose tolerance, inflammation markers lowered, and when they measured their level of satiety the next day after just a regular breakfast, it was improved with the resistant starch intake. As you know, we recommend a product called UCAN, which is a specialized starch product, and one of the reasons is that it does, as a heat and moisture treated cornstarch, it helps produce amylopectin in that product, which is a source of resistant starch. Unlike other resistant starches like waxy maize, Vitargo is a brand name of another resistant starch, UCAN does digest. So it does have some calories, but if you go to the next slide, it shows, the studies on it show that the benefit of UCAN is it helps level out blood sugar levels and insulin and helps over a prolonged period of time. So it's a way of getting a starch in, because the phase 1 of our diet is we have the only source of starch is beans and legumes. So this is a way of adding a starch back in that people can have that provides blood sugar for energy throughout. We like it in protein shakes in the morning. So for energy, improved energy throughout the morning, but because the blood sugar level is regulated at about 85, 86, people can go into fat stores as a source of energy. So you get fat burning even though you've taken in a starch. So it's an interesting and really helpful product. Now I just want to get back to the higher protein intake. I want to show that it also does help preserve bone. And higher protein diets have been found to increase leptin sensitivity and satiety. And I think I have another slide that talks about reduced calorie intake a little further. Now, the very last point on this one, on a very low carb diet that was 10% higher in protein, they found the best weight and fat loss compared to a low fat diet. No bone mineral density changes, but when you go very low carb, you do get increased ketones, and that is pro-inflammatory. So the point is we want to try and keep the level of carb a little bit higher, and so we're up in the 20 to 30% range. Ketones cause increased production of arachidonic acid, so it's not a good effect. With higher protein intake, this study found that subjects would go into a spontaneous calorie restriction of up to 450 calories per day. Interesting that higher protein helps blunt appetite. A lot of people get afraid that with higher protein intake, they're going to lose bone. My previous slide showed that that does not happen. Okay, higher protein breakfast. I want to make a point on this. This is a study by a woman named Heather Leidy, whom I saw present on this research, and she is an advocate out there for higher protein intake, and especially to try to make sure to get in about 35 grams with breakfast, because it reduced snacking over the course of a whole day, it reduced ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, and increased PYY, which is a satiety hormone, and it blunts that morning glycemic response. And she also came out and stated, if you get a little bit of flack for recommending a diet that's a little bit higher in protein, you can point back to this study that there are many researchers that I've been seeing at some of the dietetics conferences that feel that the lower protein intake that is typically recommended, 0.8 grams per kilo, is not enough. They're recommending now 1.2 to 1.5, and that's the range we're in, if not maybe even a little higher with our diets. Okay, let's move on. Most people only get about 10 grams of protein at breakfast in an average breakfast, so that's the point of this slide. Now, when you compare, let's say somebody's following some kind of a Weight Watchers or something, and they're doing 1,500 calories, and they're in that 50 to 60% range of their calories coming from carb. That means they're going to be taking in 206 grams of carb a day. Now let's say they do real good and they eat a lot of that, fruits and vegetables, let's say 9 servings a day. That's going to take up 60 grams of those carb. That allows for another 146 grams of carb to be taken in. That's 10 servings per day. If you look at the protein intake, it's only going to be 75 grams on this way of eating. That's one of the problems I see when I look at those types of diets. They'll have a sandwich with a lot of bread, a couple little, 2 ounces of protein. It's not the ratio that we need. Okay, let's move on. Whereas when you look at a 1,500 calorie intake on about a 20% carb, you're going to only take in 75 grams of protein or carbohydrate. And if you use up, a lot of that with non-starchy vegetables and you take up 15 grams per serving from fruit, if you're taking in the recommended 10 vegetables per day, it leaves 1 or 2 starch servings and 1 or 2 fruit servings. And the protein intake on this one will be more like 100 grams per day. So if you get a few grams from your other foods, it's 85 grams from animal protein, and that's about the range that we're in. So let's go back just a second on the previous slide. For summary, what I want to tell you about the low-carb feature of the diet is that it's going to be useful for all your patients that need to lose weight, for all your patients that have insulin resistance issues. It's going to be the most effective for weight loss around the waist. It's going to be the most effective for preserving basal metabolic rate and for helping control appetite. But clinically, the big issues that it addresses are lipids and blood pressure and all the milieu of conditions that are tied in with insulin resistance, you know, elevating blood sugars and weight. Okay? The next part of our diet is that our diet addresses is gut health. Basically what we have is we have a nation of people who have been overusing antibiotics for various reasons. People are using antibiotics for, you know, control of acne. They're just taking it intermittently for different types of bacterial infections, starting with having a lot of ear infections a lot of times as a child. The problem is that the effects, this citation says months. There are actually other studies that show that it can wipe out beneficial flora. Some strains don't ever come back even after a couple of years. So when that happens, it predisposes people to yeast overgrowth and all the downroad of things that happen from proliferation of yeast in the gut. So let's move on. So we'll see what some of these things are. When people end up getting proliferation of yeast, it makes people become prone towards gas, becoming gassy, especially after meals, especially after high carb meals. The mycotoxins that are put out from the yeast damage and cause intestinal cells to actually die off if it's, you know, if it's strong enough and significant enough. And it also begins to cause immune changes and cause a dampening of T cells, Th1, but an upregulation of Th2. And then you can get all sorts of other after effects of things like we know that our beneficial flora direct production of our tight junction proteins. So when that happens, we don't have good integrity holding intestinal contents out of the bloodstream, and we'll get migration of lipopolysaccharides into the bloodstream and start creating all kinds of effects. And we also get things like overproduction of acetaldehyde, which interferes with various areas of our health, including our mood and mental clarity. So one of the big symptoms you'll see in people that have yeast proliferation is this foggy headedness, and that's part of the effect of that is from this acetaldehyde. This whole thing can lead to, I've mentioned chemical sensitivities, but the other big thing is food allergies or food sensitivities of different types, autoimmune conditions, joint pain issues because the immune attack becomes systemic, and some of these lipopolysaccharides lodge on the hyaluronic acid and glycoproteins in our joints. Okay, so these are the effects and the types of symptoms that you'll see in the patients. Let's move on. This whole process creates a tremendous amount of inflammation, pro-inflammatory cytokine production in the body. And the reason I bring this up is because you'll have times when you have clients that just controlling glycemic load, and they still don't lose weight. And I've seen this happen. When that happens, we know one of two things. We either have a good bit of toxicity we have to deal with, or we have someone that has a tremendous amount of inflammation getting promoted from food sensitivity issues. In fact, in a diet group I had several years ago, I had one of the participants who fit this scenario exactly. She had done Atkins diet and she could not lose weight no matter what she did. Calorie control didn't work, low carb didn't work. Well, we took her history and found out that when she was young, she had a significant dairy allergy. And as she got older, it wasn't quite as strong, so she started eating dairy again. So for her, when she cut the dairy back out of the diet, because on the Atkins diet she was eating cheese, then she lost weight. And we'll see this over and over. So when this is a factor for people, it will be profound, the difference that it will make in them, taking food allergens out of the diet and doing things to get that gut flora recolonized, like taking probiotics and doing resistant starch. Okay, next slide. Let's just go ahead and move on. But okay, let's move on that as well. We're talking about the immune shifts and the inflammation that it causes. The other thing is when we don't have good beneficial flora colonies is this regulation of glucose and appetite. That's on the third bullet. And it also affects the nutrient absorption. So, and we see this a lot. When we can rehab that gut and we can get people better absorbing their minerals, it'll make a huge difference. And we will actually see, like, you know, proneness to injuries of different types, spraining ankles. We'll see, you know, magnesium deficiency symptoms of this horrible, you know, muscle tightness that develops. People just can't ever get their muscles to relax. They're not absorbing their magnesium and other nutrients. So that's a huge, huge, huge issue. Okay, we'll move on and go again. So what I want you to know is, for your clients that you're working with on a day in and day out basis, when you see people with seasonal allergies, with chronic kind of unexplained headaches, joint pain issues, actual arthritis or other just generalized joint pain, any autoimmune condition, and where maybe it'll just be the person that's, no matter what they do, they can't seem to lose weight, you know they need this elimination diet part of the metabolic code diet. It is enormously helpful. Also, when you have people that have the, you know, the excessive gassiness, cutting down on the carbohydrates can help control that, cutting down on the sugars and starches. So it's tremendously helpful to quality of life. So the diet eliminates wheat and gluten, all cow's milk. We have an egg-free version. Now, we didn't eliminate eggs in the beginning because we just found over years and years of experience that when you take the wheat and dairy out in particular, that's the most helpful. We did also eliminate soy in the phase 1 diets menus, and there are no peanuts in it. And that takes the allergen load down tremendously, and it will help out quite a few people. And I'll explain a little later how they go through this discovery process. Giving your clients probiotics can be tremendously helpful, and there's just a new study that came out that found that particular L. rhamnosus in particular helped with weight loss when they looked at it in a double-blind randomized study. Okay, let's move on. I real quick want to try to get to the next point so we have a little bit of time for questions. Moving on from gut flora, let's just advance through the slides here, Marta. Keep going, because I already talked about most of this. So we have low glycemic load, we have elimination, which is going to help protect and preserve gut health. with low allergen probiotics and resistant starch. Our next consideration and what is built into the diet is the toxic load issue. So next slide, you'll notice that I want to talk about the food quality. You'll notice in our materials we do talk an awful lot about trying to move over to eating as many organic foods and or sustainably raised. The point is foods that are raised without the addition of chemicals. It's super important for lowering toxic burden. And I just real quick want to show you a couple of the studies, if we can move on. Contrary to what you'll find in headlines, when you dig into more thorough reviews, the nutrient content of organic foods is higher. Okay, let's move on. So people need all the nutrition they can get, right? This is just making the point. The Environmental Working Group is an organization that's doing a lot of work on looking at all the ways Americans get exposed to chemicals in their bodies and how they impact us. So let's move on. And basically what we're finding, the final point on this slide is, you know, Jim and I in our clinic used to talk about the effects of, you know, chemicals in the environment disrupting our hormone production in various ways, and therefore disrupting metabolism. They also find big immune effects, carcinogenic effects, you know, reproduction defects, that type of thing. And people in the medical community used to criticize us for that, but now the studies are coming out and showing. So one of the most significant ones, which found that different environmental substances like PCBs and dioxin bring about significant endocrine effects, including insulin resistance and thyroid disruption. And let's move on. There are a couple more important studies. This one was on organochlorine pesticides, which is a category of pesticides that store in fat tissue. And what they found was the more organochlorine pesticides in the fat, the lower the T3 level in the person. So this was one that found that this particular category of pesticides, which is a number of chemicals, disrupts thyroid. And in fact, they said that when people lose weight, the levels of the pesticides increase in the plasma because they're getting released. And they propose that the release of these pesticides could be a reason people will sometimes hit these weight loss plateaus when they lose weight. So this is an issue we address by, you know, it's not just a you know, a touchy-feely, we all should eat organic. This is for the physical effect of helping to lower the burden of these organochlorine and other pesticides and the effects they have on the body, so that as you lose weight, you're not replacing those pesticides, you're allowing your body to start to eliminate them, and therefore hopefully help prevent plateaus. And in fact, sometimes if people hit a plateau, that's one of the measures that we'll take and that we recommend in our diet is go ahead and put them on a couple of products that help support detox in the liver and the kidney, you know, help the kidneys not be affected. That is actually a strategy you can use, and we've done it many times. This one looked at the differences between pesticides that are found in different types of meat, and this one they looked at beef. So the conventionally raised beef is denoted with the C and the organic with the O. They looked at chlorinated hydrocarbons, and in the conventionally raised beef, they found the presence of, now it's not amounts, but numbers of different types. They found 2 different types in muscle tissue, 6 different types in fat, 10 different types in liver. If you look at the organically raised, none in muscle, which is, you know, the primary part that most people eat. Not a lot of people eat liver anymore, but only 4 even in the liver and 3 in the fat. So way less presence of numbers of chlorinated hydrocarbons in the organic versus the conventionally raised. Natural beef, you've all seen like natural meats. All that means is that it's raised antibiotic free. It's nothing to do with pesticides. There's still quite a few chlorinated hydrocarbons, but not quite as many as the conventionally. And then another whole category of pesticides, organophosphate pesticides, there's none in the organic versus 6, 4, and 1 in the conventionally raised. So it's important on the meats especially. Those are my references. Moving on. I do know that cost can be an issue for some people. I know that some of the organic foods are way more expensive, but if you watch sales and things like that, you can be effective. Another thing that people can do is they can use the Environmental Working Group lists to at least buy organic and the top contaminated foods like apples, strawberries. And the Environmental Working Group has this as an app that you can get on your phone, and I refer to it all the time in the store. You'd think I would remember. The only ones I remember are apples, strawberries, and grapes, and celery. Then it comes to other things, I have to check my list. So these are the most contaminated. Try to at least buy these in organic versions. And the next slide shows the ones that are least contaminated. So I usually don't worry about buying organic asparagus. It's a little hard to find anyway. Cauliflower, avocados. So this helps. This information helps. Okay? These are a couple studies, and I'll just move through them quickly, that showed that when they put kids on diets of all organic foods, their metabolites from pesticides reduced dramatically. This one, they found that kids on conventional diets had 6 times higher levels of organophosphate pesticides than the kids on the organic diets. Next slide. This one shows that as soon as they put the kids on the organic foods, it took a couple of days, and then eventually the organophosphate pesticide metabolites went to 0, non-detectable levels. As soon as they reintroduced the conventional foods, the metabolites showed up again. So the point is, changing to the organic foods makes a difference. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, go back just real quickly. Another issue is fish. If you notice, we have fish in our diet. People need it for the omega-3s, but we know that we have mercury in fish, and we've seen that in practice many times when we have people that come in that eat a lot of fish, and we test for heavy metals. We do see higher mercury. So yes, eat some fish, but don't eat too much. You are taking a chance on exposing yourself to too much mercury. So we prefer to make sure they get all the fish oils from a distilled and, purified fish oil product. One of the things that you need to emphasize to your patients when they're doing the diet, this is super important, is to make sure if they're going to eat beef, do not eat anything but organic or grass-fed beef. Very rarely. Once in a great while, Jim or I will order a steak when we're eating out at a restaurant. If they don't have an organic or, grass-fed beef, but not very often. And we do see this making a difference. I've had patients that, I gave them the diet, and they found, for whatever reasons, they didn't eat the variety of foods in the plan, and they found I had a recipe for a lasagna that was made with, instead of pasta, it was made with zucchini in place of the pasta, but I went ahead and used beef. Well, I had a woman, couldn't understand, she hadn't lost much weight at all. Here she was making up big things of this lasagna, and eating it almost every day, and she was using conventionally raised beef. So I'm really convinced that this makes a difference. On the poultry, it's better, but it's not quite as crucial as with the beef. But bottom line, the more you can get organically raised vegetables and meats, the lower your intake of these harmful chemicals is going to be. Okay? So it's important for reducing our heavy metal and other chemical intake. Okay? We'll go ahead and move on. And I just look for it on sale because I know it's expensive. So with the metabolic code diet, you are going so much further for your clients than with an average diet. And you have a diet that not only will address this glycemic load regulation, you're also addressing this issue of food sensitivities and all the inflammation that can come from that. Because we have high plant food intake, it's a high antioxidant diet. You know, we need that to fight all the inflammation that we get, oxidation from environmental pollution that we can't control, like in our air. And so we emphasize this eating of organic foods as much as possible. Now, what do you do if you know you have the client that just can't afford it? Well, let them do what they can do. They usually will still get benefits from the fact of it being low allergen and low glycemic load, but just do the best they can do. Okay, let's move on. And the other part of the diet, as you guys know, well, most of you, some of you are using the diet already. We do have a questionnaire that's included in the Metabolic Code Diet program that we have on the Lifestyle Guidance portal. And the reason is to start to support other areas that influence metabolism. You're not going to do everything just with diet. Sometimes people just aren't sleeping, and if they're not sleeping, there are some great natural products that can be used to help support sleep. There are studies that show when people are in sleep debt, it doesn't matter what they do with diet and exercise, they maintain a chemistry that looks like a person who has diabetes. So it's an extremely important area. And gut health is an extremely important area. So we look on that questionnaire to see if they have very many gut symptoms. And then we make recommendations for the natural products that they can use to address those issues. And the big area that I like to address for people is the area of stress. Because we have so many people walking around so stressed out today, and we have some great supplements that help people's the body. It helps control the stress response in the body, and that starts to help re-regulate mood and all the food cravings that can come from stress, like, you know, cravings for high carb comfort foods. So we have some craving control products and mood support products. So these are the areas that you can't get to with just diet alone. Okay, and so what do people eat on the diet? The diet is made up of primarily your high quality proteins along with a lot of the non-starchy vegetables, and then we eat a little bit of fruit, we eat nuts and seeds and high quality fats. We use olive oil in particular, but any of the healthy fats that we have a whole section in one of the PDFs on how to make some healthy fat choices. And moving on, we control starchy foods. So your phase 1, we don't have any starch other than what is in beans and legumes, and that is there to be a source of resistant starch and help preserve gut integrity. We also recommend UCAN, which can help. It's not essential, but it's helpful. And a little bit of fruit, because that's a way to get a natural sweet, and it's something that you know, you can't replace the high vitamin C and some of the other nutrients. So we need as much variety in those plant foods as possible. So we try not to eliminate the fruit, but just control it. We recommend no artificial sweeteners. People can use stevia. There are other things like coconut sugar if you want a little bit of, you know, sweetener on something, but try to control them, but stevia is fine. Okay, and moving on. So just to wrap up, I think that for those of you that are implementing the diet, you'll be surprised to see how well people respond. It's a diet that not only is going to help them lose weight and help control cardiovascular disease risk factors, but it'll also help control things like, pain in joints. It'll help control gassiness, all these other quality of life. The high fiber, we recommend using ground chia and flax seeds in the protein shakes, and that helps with, good thorough elimination. So what you find is people feel better. They don't feel worse. They don't look ashen. they don't have low energy. They usually feel much, much better. And you can help with the satiety by being higher protein and low allergenic food, and then you can address all other areas as needed with the supplements. So it's just amazing how good people will feel on the diet. And the main thing is to try to help control hunger, because people can't stick to any diet if they're hungry. So the diet goes in 3 phases, just real quick to explain how it works. The phase 1, as I've said, we take all the starch out. In phase 2 is when they will start to make some food reintroductions. And one of the big questions is, when do you go on to phase 2? Well, it will vary for different people. We have a few practitioners out there who are telling us that it seems that people do best if they stick to phase 1 at least 4, but for as many as 8 weeks. And honestly, because we have the resistant starch in there, if people feel full and satisfied and they're enjoying the rate of weight loss they're getting, they could even go a little longer if they wanted. But, sometimes people will be missing a certain food, like we don't have any soy in the phase 1, and maybe someone likes edamame. So after 4-6 weeks, they could try some edamame. But what they need to do is they need to watch after they eat the food and see if they get symptoms from it. And that's all explained in the phase 2 PDF. Once in a while, you'll have people that they really are just quite hungry when they don't have any starch other than the beans in the diet. And they'll want to put a little bit back in to help take the edge off of the hunger. And, they might need to do that in as little as 2 to 4 weeks. I've had that with some people, that they just get very, very hungry. Don't let them go hungry. Just say, well, let's just move you to phase 2. And the issue is they just have to measure. We did the diet in calorie levels, 1,500 and 1,800, not because we're concerned about calories, but just to show that we had a little bit lower protein version in the 1,500 that's used mainly for women, and then the higher protein, the 1,800 calorie for men, or for a larger statured woman, or a woman that's very, very active, or, that just finds that they need more. But those are the 2 levels. And really, it's not crucial in phase 1 that people measure their foods. Only food that they really need to watch is they need to make sure they don't overdo it on the beans and legumes, because they are a starch source, and they're a little bit higher calorie and glycemic load, so they can get away from people if they eat too much. But other than that, they really don't need to measure. So as long as they eat the foods that we have listed and they're not adding anything else in there, if they eat the amount that's shown and they're still hungry, they can go back and have a little more of their protein and their non-starchy vegetables. It's usually not going to make or break people if they have a little bit more, couple more servings of their nuts and seeds per day. But once they get to phase 2, it's super critical that they measure those starches. And the guide walks them through figuring out how many starches they can have per day, and they just watch their weight when they reintroduce them, and they'll figure out the level they can have where it'll take the edge off the hunger, but they'll still lose weight. And then once the person gets to close to their ideal weight or at their ideal weight, then you can introduce them to the phase 3 materials. It helps the client put it all together, because over the course of that phase 2 time, they're going to reintroduce allergens, and they're going to find out they reacted strongly to peanuts, let's say. Just the guide in phase 3 lets them know if you have a strong food allergen response, try to eat that food very, very infrequently. If you have a moderate, it gives a guideline for a suggested amount that they could intake a food with a moderate, because people have to get back to real life, and this is what helps them learn how to maintain. And the most crucial part of it is not eating foods that they were sensitive to too frequently, but gauge how frequently they have it based on the strength of their response, and knowing what their maintenance amount of carbohydrates is per day. And that will help people maintain their weight for long term, especially when you address any other issues that they have going on, such as with food cravings or gut health. Okay? Next slide. To get a patient going on this is really, really easy. It's a simple matter of entering their name and their email in the Lifestyle Guidance Portal area for practitioners. And if some of you want to hang on for a little while, Marta can show you. And they'll get the Metabolic Code Diet questionnaire that assesses the different areas of metabolism, and they'll get supplement recommendations from that. And then you can go over those supplement recommendations with them and let them decide together what they're going to use. You assign their diet, either the 1500 or 1800. The Express is homemade meals. The Made Easy is the one that includes our Artisan Bistro frozen entrees, which are excellent. And that's for people that can or don't like to cook. And then you just have the client, it's very simple. They can go online, they can find the PDFs on there, all the support they need, the instructions for how to use the software. It's very easy to enter in their information and track what they've eaten, track their weight, any other biometrics they want. And I would encourage them to track, because then that way, if they don't happen to be getting good results, you can look back at what they've been doing and see what where they've been going wrong. Now, a big question is follow-ups. So it depends. If you have a patient that you put on the diet for more like to help with a health condition, such as to help, do address lipid issues, let's say, or blood sugar issues, and you get them going on the diet, they can do the diet as they are able over the next few weeks, and then you can just discuss it with them at their next follow-up appointment with you. But if you're doing it specifically for weight loss, it is usually better to have more frequent follow-ups. But what you can do for that is you can put together a program where you can, charge accordingly for a quick check-in, weigh them, see how they're doing. It's really best if you can touch base with the clients every couple of weeks, and some people do it weekly, just to keep the client accountable. But you can customize and put together the program that works for your practice when it comes to that. How often to do the follow-ups, but that's the minimum every 2 weeks is what we recommend. It's a simple process. So what can you do? What are you going to do next? If you've really been looking for a good approach to diet, we really feel that this is a comprehensive approach. It addresses many areas of dysregulated metabolism, and it's all pre-done for you. So if you're already using our portal, the Metabolic Code Diet is there and available. If not, you can check it out more at metaboliccode.com. You can join us on future webinars, but check us out.
All right, thanks, Laura. I was going to open it up for questions, and what I'll do here is you can either type your question in the question chat box, or if you raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can ask Laura directly. So
I do want to mention, next slide, I think, our next webinar is going to be about popular diets. I'm going to go over pros and cons, things that may have value, what to watch out for on diets like paleo diets, vegetarian, vegan diets, blood type diets. I've got quite a few in there. So I'll do as many as I can fit in an hour.
Great. Laura, I do have some questions here that were posted.
Okay.
And I'm going to group these two together. This is from John Mallon. He's one of our newest enrollees to the Lifestyle Guidance Portal.
Okay.
He would like to know, would the ketogenic diet benefit Alzheimer's and dementia because of the ketones produced, providing more brain energy? And then the second part of that is about the keto breath with a low-carb diet and what to do to eliminate that. So I guess it's a two-part question about ketogenic diet.
Yes, ketogenic diets definitely have some evidence showing efficacy in Alzheimer's. They also are some evidence being of value for cancer patients, for seizure patients. So they do have some applications. They're difficult to do. They're very difficult to stick to, but when people really need them, that like say with seizures, they'll do them, and you can make them livable. I really don't know of anything to help the ketone breath other than trying to drink more water. I haven't found any magic tricks for that, unfortunately. But drinking water can help a good, it helps.
Okay, great. I see Sandra. I'm going to unmute Sandra here. I see a hand up. Sandra, did you have a question for Laura tonight?
Disorders or autism.
Oh, we've just caught part of it.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think it just came in partway. Yeah, could you please repeat that, Sandra? Thanks.
Sure. What my question was is if the diet has ever been used in children with either neurodevelopmental disorders or autism.
Yes. We used to use it all the time for kids with autism in our clinic. Right now we're not seeing. We just started up our new clinic in California, and we're not seeing any. But yes, I used it a lot for kids with autism. The only thing that we just have to sometimes be a little more stringent on casein intake than what might be built in. For example, when people use a non-dairy cheese, they have to make sure that it doesn't contain casein, that type of thing. But other than that, it's worked very well for kids with autism.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, did you want me to flip over to the Metabolic Code Diet view for just a moment, or does anybody else have questions?
Yeah, and as you do that, I wanted to mention, I didn't have time to write up case studies, but one of the things that I didn't get to go into fully was about the whole grain intake. If I had time to write up this case study, we had a gentleman that started the diet 3 weeks ago. This happened to be a colleague, someone we've known from the nutrition industry business. So he's been in this business for years and worked out 5-6 days a week at his local gym, worked out hard. My husband actually has seen him work out, so he knows he was doing good workouts, but never could control his weight and completely. He wasn't obese, but always carried a good extra 20 and had gotten up to like 30, 35 pounds overweight, carrying it in his belly. And this is with working out religiously and taking supplements of different types. But still in all, couldn't manage the weight, and eventually his lipids and blood glucose started going up as well, and he was getting into some borderline high blood pressure. He got started on the diet, and in 3 weeks has lost 22 pounds. Basically, it's the testament to the fact that, that's how powerful just the diet alone can be, because here was someone who was exercising, using supplements of various types, but when we dug in and evaluated, we found his supplements weren't really addressing the issues that he had going on. So we took the supplements and geared it toward supplements to support insulin resistance issues. So, chromium and alpha lipoic and magnesium and zinc and all that range of different supplements to do a much better job of supporting blood glucose regulation. And then when you combine that with just taking that glycemic load down and the food allergens down, the weight just fell off. And he found out that he was also sensitive to corn through this process. So that wasn't one of the issues, and we hope to have more support for this particular issue available on and information available online, because one of the issues you'll come up against for when people are sensitive to corn is a lot of the gluten-free foods, replacement foods like pastas and breads and crackers and whatnot, they rely on some cornstarch. And you have to get a little more specific about trying to find the gluten-free foods. And there are stores that have them, that do not include the corn then. But it was a very good testament to the fact that, the diet was the missing piece for that person. And I think you'll find that that's the case for a lot of people.
Laura, we have a couple more questions here in the
Okay.
chat window. Dr. Cleaver asks about the weight loss study with L-rhamnosus and the weight loss occurring in women but no weight loss in men after 12 weeks, and as to why that may have not happened in men.
Yes, that was really strange. I do not know. That was a very different finding. I haven't found any possible explanations for that, for why it was more effective for women. But there are other studies that have been done, smaller, but that showed benefit for weight loss using probiotics, and they weren't so strain specific. So we're venturing that, it's for a number of reasons. The probiotics help downregulate that immune-driven source of inflammation, and help with gut health issues like the production of GLP-1 and the PYY, so better blood sugar regulation and better appetite control. But I really have no explanation for why it was more effective in women. Sorry, Joe. I don't know. If I find out, I'll let you know.
Great, thanks, Laura. Marlon Brooks is asking, would the diet work for teenagers?
Yes. I have used it for teenagers. The only caveat we have is if it happens to be like a boy that they play a sport but they're still overweight. Sometimes we have to start out with phase 2, just because when they are working out, they're going to need a little more starch. But as long as they cut out all the sugars religiously, then that will usually be enough. But I prefer, if I use it in a teenager, I prefer to go ahead and start them in phase 1 if possible. So I try to, you can't always do it, but if you can get them to do it at a time when they're not in the middle of a sport. But most teenagers, if they're overweight, they're usually not as active in sports. But I have had patients that are. But that's the only caution that I'll give, is if they are active in a sport, that might not be quite enough energy for them being just phase 1. You can try it out and see, but they have to keep a close eye on how they feel. I've had teenagers that do it and practice all the way through and using phase 1, no starch at all, and it just means they're just going to go straight into their fat stores more quickly. What can really also help in that scenario is using UCAN, because that'll really give them energy during their workouts, but it won't impede their weight loss.
Great, thanks, Laura. Also, Dr. Joe Cleaver also asks about whether you avoid diets that induce ketogenesis because of the risk of increasing inflammation.
Yes, I really don't like to use ketogenic diets if it's just for weight loss. Only if there's a specific reason, like for seizure disorder. I've done it. I've helped a couple of cancer patients use it, and other than that, I don't like to use them.
And also, he asked about intermittent fasting and efficacy in weight loss. Do you have any?
Yeah, intermittent fasting is interesting, and it is showing efficacy. What I do if I have a client that I want to try intermittent fasting with is I will have them go ahead and skip morning food, up to like noon, but put the food that they would have eaten in the morning, clump it into 2 bigger meals later in the day. Yeah, so like a protein shake or whatever the food is on breakfast, have them not eat that and add it on to their lunch meal. Take their fruit and nut snacks and add it on to their evening meal, like use it for like dessert after a bigger evening meal. And because there is some good data showing benefits from intermittent fasting. So that's one way you can use the diet meal plans, but just rearrange where they eat it.
Great, that's great, Laura. Also, just finally, Joe Cleaver also says that the metabolic code diets have been very effective in their patients there at the clinic, and he thinks.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, so John Mallon asks, is there a formula to determine how much protein to give a patient, and will an overabundance of protein convert to sugar, and therefore the body will store it as fat? That's his question.
It can. We use just convert the body weight to kilograms and then multiply that number times 1.2 to 1.5, and that's the formula for finding out their minimum amount of protein. And yes, when we eat more protein, we do know that some of the amino acids get converted to glucose, so you can get somewhat of an increase in blood sugar from proteins, but it's way under the high glycemic load foods. And what I will do is and this is where the calorie control will help. Here's the progression. Once in a while, you'll have people that they'll lose weight going through the process, but they'll only get so far. And then if you do things with supporting detox and that doesn't help, and you kind of come down to the bottom of the road, then that's when we have to start to look at calories. And I have had times when even within these diet parameters, we have to go down in calories to get the rest of the weight off that they need to get off. So that's kind of how we do it. But by taking them through this progression of starting out with the elimination of the sugars and starch, elimination of the allergens, increasing the protein and healthy fats, that is usually a diet that will eventually get to a downregulated appetite. So by taking them through that process, you should start to notice, especially if you're doing good, supplement support for food cravings and things like that, that it will, at least they'll start to get the appetite under better control. So then it's easier if you also have to start looking at calories, it's easier to take the calories down at that point. So it's still a good way to start out.